When you look up, 6 men are waving at you from a steel platform 80 feet above the water. Beneath their feet is the bridge of USS Arizona, cut off by fire. Behind them, steel plating is warping in the heat. Below, the water is coated with fuel, and the fuel is burning. A line lies coiled at your feet. Minutes ago, your captain ordered your repair ship, USS Vestal, to cut every connection to Arizona and get underway at once. The order is not wrong. Your own ship has been hit by 2 bombs. A hole 5 feet wide has been blown through the bottom. The stern is flooding, and the steering gear is gone. If you stay, the whole ship may go down with Arizona. But 6 men are still across the gap. Your name is Joseph George. You are 26 years old. A boatswain's mate 2nd class aboard Vestal. The lines, winches, anchor chains, and lifting gear on deck are the responsibility of men like you. To save your own ship, you need to cut the lines. To save the 6 men across from you, you need to throw one back. Time is being burned away inch by inch. Just 1 day earlier, Vestal arrived at berth FF-7 in Pearl Harbor. She was moored outboard of Arizona and was scheduled to service her from the 6th of December through the 12th of December. A repair ship did not draw attention the way a battleship did. Her carpentry shop, shipfitter shop, and metal stores handled the fleet's problems that never made the news. A leaking pipe came here, so did a cracked steel plate or a broken piece of machinery. Vestal had been in service for more than 30 years. She was an old workshop afloat, patching up the fleet. This week, the ship in her care was Arizona, moored inboard. The 7th of December was a Sunday. Before 7:55 that morning, you were still doing routine deck work. Where should the lines be stowed? Were the canvas covers over the guns secured? Was anything blocking a passage needed for lifting or carrying? The work was repetitive enough that you hardly had to think about it. Then the sound of aircraft engines pressed down from above. The first men to look up thought the fleet was running another exercise. Then someone saw the red roundels on the wings and watched an aircraft skim the harbor toward the battleships. The alarm sounded. You and the men around you ran for the guns and tore off the canvas covers. Ammunition came up to the gun positions. Telephones began relaying orders. In the lower compartments, watertight doors were being shut. Vestal's 3-inch anti-aircraft gun and machine guns opened fire. The 3-inch gun fired only 3 rounds before the breech jammed. The gun crew was still trying to clear it when the bombs came down. One punched into the forward part of the ship, crashed through several decks, and exploded in the metal storeroom. The fire main and electrical cables were severed. Storerooms caught fire. Ammunition in the forward magazine was still just beyond the bulkhead, and the heat kept rising. The crew had no choice but to flood the magazine. The ship built to repair others flooded part of herself first. The second bomb went down through the after part of the ship. It passed through the carpentry shop, the shipfitter shop, and fuel tanks, then blew a large hole through the bottom. Seawater and fuel poured in together. The stern began to settle. You had no time to inspect every damaged space. Aircraft were still overhead. Some men fought the fires while others kept shooting at low-flying targets. A torpedo passed beneath Vestal, then struck the larger battleship moored inboard. What happened next made that near miss no comfort at all. A bomb penetrated Arizona's deck and detonated the forward magazine. You saw the light first, then the air struck like an invisible wall of steel. Flame, smoke, and fragments rose between the ships. The blast swept across Vestal's gun positions, throwing men into the water and scattering equipment across the deck. Your captain, Cassin Young, was blown overboard too. Fuel already coated the water. Others reached for anything hanging over the side. Fire advanced from Arizona across the oil. Vestal's deck and stern caught fire as well. Young climbed back aboard, soaked through. He did not tell the crew to keep jumping into the water. He called back everyone who could still move, organized the firefighting, and ordered the engine room to prepare both main engines. His reasoning was clear. Arizona could no longer be saved. Vestal still carried a shipload of living men, and ammunition the fire had not yet reached. If the 2 ships stayed together, the burning oil and continuing secondary explosions would eventually take the repair ship too. At about 8:30 a.m., preparations to leave began. The next problem was waiting on deck. Vestal no longer had steering. By running one engine ahead and the other astern, She could maneuver, but only slowly and clumsily. She would still need a harbor tug to pull her bow clear, before either engine could be used. Every line holding the two ships together had to be cast off or cut. That job belonged to you. Those lines had once held the repair ship close enough to work on the battleship. Now they tied a flooding vessel to the edge of a fire. Orders kept coming across the deck, urging the forward crews to cut the connections as fast as they could. You began working through the lines. That was when you heard someone shouting above you. The voices were broken apart by gunfire and the roar of flames. You followed the waving arms and saw that men were still trapped on Arizona's anti-aircraft director platform. 6 of them. The platform stood about 80 feet above the water. The explosion had destroyed the normal route down, and fire sealed off the bridge and forward superstructure. All 6 men had been badly burned. Their uniforms were charred. If they jumped, they would land in a burning sea. If they stayed, the steel framework and platform would keep heating around them. USS Vestal pulled away. The gap between the two ships would widen fast. The harbor was filled with wounded men and burning ships. No rescue boat could reach that high platform in time. The 6 men began waving at you. You could not make out their words, but you understood what they wanted. A line you had won at your feet. If you cut every connection, you had obeyed the order. No one could blame you. The repair ship's stern was still sinking. The fires on deck were not out. Every man around you was waiting for the ship to move. If you threw the line, you would have to remain on the exposed deck. The men across from you would have to secure it and come over one by one. Until the last man reached Vestal, the line could not be released. There was no meeting. You had no time to calculate both costs. You picked up the line, gathered a coil, and threw it toward the platform. The men across the gap caught the light line, then used it to haul over a heavier one that could bear their weight. The sailor who had crossed last secured the end to the steel framework. You and the men beside you pulled the Vestal end tight. A sloping road appeared between the two ships. It had no deck and no railing. Burning oil lay below it. Aircraft still passed overhead. The first man lowered himself onto the line and began moving toward you. His palms were burned. He could only shift his weight from one arm to the other. The line itself was hot from the flames. Each time he moved, the men on Vestal hauled in a little more slack. You began to count. Onain. The second man came onto the line. His name was Donald Stratton, although you did not know it yet. The explosion had burned his hands and body, and he still had to use those hands to cross the space between the ships. 2, then came the third man, and the fourth. Each time a man reached you, the crew pulled him away from the side and cleared the space for the next. No one could stop in the middle of the deck to ask names. Everyone still standing was fighting fires, carrying wounded men, or preparing to get underway. 5, the next to last man, was Lauren Brunner. He later remembered that the water 80 feet below was completely covered in fire. Jumping off had no chance of survival. In that moment, all he could do was move toward you inch by inch until hands on deck caught his clothing and pulled him over the side. 1 man remained on the platform. His name was Alvin Doverack. He had stayed behind to secure the knot on Arizona's end of the line. Only after everyone ahead of him was clear did he lower himself onto it. If that knot came loose, the last man would fall between the ships. The line had begun to smoke. Dodrock kept moving. You held the other end and waited until he crossed the final stretch, then pulled him onto the deck. 6, all 6 men had made it across. The line had completed its one and only task. The rescue did not make the world around you quiet. Both ships were still burning. Vestal was still taking water. Preparations to leave had never stopped. You turned back to the mooring lines. At 8:45 a.m., the forward lines were cut. Vestal started both main engines and used one ahead and one astern to control her hull as best she could. The harbor tug took her bow and pulled her away from Arizona. At last, the repair ship began to move. She was not sailing toward victory, and she was not racing out of the harbor after enemy aircraft. She was looking for a place where she would not block the channel and would not sink with her entire crew in deep water. At 9:10, Vestal dropped anchor near McGrew Point in 35 feet of water. The crew kept taking soundings and measuring the ship's draft and list. The numbers kept getting worse. Her draft at the stern increased to 27 feet, and the ship listed 6.5 degrees to starboard. Water continued to move through damaged compartments. Fires were not fully out. If another attack came, the repair ship at anchor could lose what buoyancy she had left. Cassin Young made his second decision that morning to save the ship. He would drive Vestal onto a shoal. At 9:50, both main engines turned again. With no rudder, the repair ship crept toward Iea Shoal until her bottom met the mud, and she could go no farther. She was aground. That decision saved her. Vestal was later repaired and returned to the Pacific War, where she continued making emergency repairs to damaged ships. All 6 men from the anti-aircraft director platform made it across alive. 2 later died of their wounds. 4 survived. Arizona never left berth F-7. 1,177 sailors and Marines died aboard her. A memorial was later built where she sank, a white structure spanning the wreck. Your name did not become famous that day. In 1942, Cassin Young wrote a statement on the back of your re-enlistment card, recording your part in saving the Arizona sailors. The card eventually went into the archives. You remained in the Navy, served through the war, and retired in 1955. You rarely spoke to your family about Pearl Harbor. You died in 1996. Even then, you had received no combat decoration for the rescue. Donald Stratton and Lauren Bruner, 2 of the men you saved, did not let the matter rest. Again and again, they petitioned the Navy to recognize the man who had thrown them the line. The application required first-hand witnesses and confirmation from a qualified officer. Stratton and Bruner were still alive and could testify. Cassin Young had been killed in the naval battle of Guadalcanal in 1942. As the years passed, other officers who might have witnessed the rescue were gone too. Then someone found the re-enlistment card in the archives. Young's signature was still on the back, along with his statement about your rescue. The Navy accepted it as evidence. On the 7th of December, 2017, the 76th anniversary of the attack, the Navy presented your daughter with a Bronze Star Medal with the Combat V's device at the USS Arizona Memorial. When she accepted the medal, the battleship that had never left the harbor was still beneath her feet. Looking toward shore, she could also see the direction Vestal had taken toward the shoal. 76 years earlier, you had stood between those 2 ships. One had to leave. 6 men had no way out. You had only one line. You threw it to the men first.